First of all, a big thank you for having me today, and I think I do appreciate. It's sometimes over here you can get the feeling that tax campaigning is a bit of a minority sport, so it's good to be able to touch base with allies across the water. This is just a first slide, a perspective of, well, an overview of what we're going to do tonight. I'll give you some of the background of what's going on, and talk about the Isle of Man in particular, and what is this thing called offshore? What do we mean by tax haven? We'll look at the benefits and that the tax haven has delivered to the island, but what are the problems, especially for the developing world? Ada, you mentioned that in particular, and that was very much where Christian Aid was coming from on this. And we'll talk about some solutions. But included, sprinkled in the slideshow too, are some biblical quotes that I've put in, which I hope will ground us and maybe just put a biblical insight on the particular point I'm making. So we could go straight into the next slide, please, Mark. Okay, welcome to the Isle of Man. This isn't the Isle of Man on a November's evening in 2022. This is the Isle of Man, I think, probably in the 1950s or even the 30s, on the beach at Douglas, where the capital of the island. The Queen's just made us a city, even though we're only 28,000 people. Here we are, and I put this in to show that we are our economy for about a century, from 1870 to 1970, was very much based on tourism. The what were then called the working classes of Lancashire, Yorkshire, north of England, Glasgow, Belfast, Dublin, would come here for a good, cheap, affordable week's holiday, and our infrastructure in our towns were built up at that point. This is Douglas Promenade. You can see perhaps you can pick out the kind of Victorian architecture there in the background. These are all Victorian boarding houses, guest houses, and this is how we made our money. Right up till about late 60s, early 70s. And what happened then? Well, the invention of the jet engine and the package holiday happened then. And this same clientele found that they could go off to Spain, Italy, Greece for a week's holiday instead of the Isle of Man for about the same price, with guaranteed sunshine. And so our economy very quickly went off the edge of the cliff, dominated by tourism, as I said, and we had mass unemployment, mass emigration, and our national income went down rapidly around the late 60s. And the island, I should explain, is not part of the United Kingdom. We've had for many centuries, maybe because we're being a bit of a buffer zone between England, Scotland, and Ireland in the Middle Ages, and before that, the Norwegians ruled us, the Vikings, for 200 years. So we've been a kind of a buffer zone in a way, and being in the middle of the sea helps as well. But as a result of all this geography and history, we've ended up with our own parliament called Tynwald. Again, another Norse name, meaning field of assembly, place of assembly, and so we make our own laws. We're a British Crown dependency, technically, and that means that internally we can make our own laws in terms of social and economic legislation, but also for taxation, critically. But externally, for matters of foreign policy, diplomacy, defence, we come under London. We are British. So, but a great deal of autonomy in how we rule ourselves. So, for example, we only brought in car seatbelts about 20 years after the UK did. Our laws on abortion law was only reformed a couple of years ago, way later than the UK. So we have our own freedom. So we don't get a seat in Westminster. We've no MP at Westminster. We can't have it both ways. But we've got our own little elected parliament here. And so we had, with that legislative freedom, when tourism went off that cliff, we had the ability to think, okay, what do we do next? And that is the birth of the tax haven. We thought, and Jersey and Guernsey were going through similar economic upheavals at the same time. We thought, and with the blessing of London, that we would become an offshore financial centre, aka tax haven. So we passed laws equally, and to be fair, this has brought us, over in the 50 years since, this has brought us jobs and prosperity. Our population, for example, has zoomed up from 50,000 at that time to 84,000 at the moment. So that's brought in a lot of both workers in the finance sector and retired people anxious to keep their well, to minimize their tax bill. So benefits to the island, but at what cost to the rest of the world in terms of lost revenue and in terms of financial secrecy. Our tax rates are very low, so individuals, the top rate is 20% compared to your 45%. For companies, no tax at all, 0%. But perhaps even more important than low tax is the secrecy that a tax haven can offer. Companies don't have to file their account. Well, they have to file their accounts, but they're not publicly available. Charities have to do far more regulatory work than companies, and there's no public register here to show who owns a company. A lot of shell companies are here. We've got 28,000 companies for 84,000 people, so one company for every 3 people. That's 4 times the rate per capita that you have in the UK. So that just explains the background of what's made us shift into that. And so we've had two generations of that, and it might be peaking, as I'll come on to say later. But the next slide, please, Mark. So this is just a you'll know these. I'm not going to do sermons really. I'm just going to take a few scriptures, but as I say, I hope they'll illustrate what I'm talking about. What does it profit a man if he'll gain the whole world and lose his own soul? And in a way, that's what I think we've done as an island. It has profited us. I don't deny that we were heading for the rocks economically, and that what we've done has added to the prosperity of the island, and we've overtaken the UK now in terms of GDP per capita. But what have we gained because of the harm done to other people in so doing? Next slide, please, Mark. Again, this is Jesus, which doesn't say an awful lot directly on tax, but as you know, the Pharisees were trying to trap him. Is it lawful to pay taxes to the emperor, Rabbi, or not? Should we pay them or should we not? And then I've missed out the middle bit. Jesus asks for the denarii, the penny, and he says, okay, he concludes, give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to God the things that are God's. And it's I think at the very least here we can say that Jesus is acknowledging the right of the state to impose taxation, and things that are God's. Doesn't mean that God hasn't got anything to say about taxation, but there's probably a sermon or two in that parable. But let's move on if we can. Next slide, please. This was the story in 2019. You may recognize there Dame Margaret Hodge for Labour, and on the right, Andrew Mitchell for the Conservatives. And this was in the dying days of the May minority administration. These two heroes really put together a coalition that together had a majority in the Commons, and they put an amendment down to a Brexit bill, which would have forced the Crown dependencies to open their company registers showing beneficial ownership. In other words, who are the human beings behind the company names? And this is one of the key things of the tax haven: secrecy in who are the shareholders, who is the owner of the companies. The UK created a register under David Cameron in 2015 showing the beneficial ownership of every UK company. It's not perfect information, but it's a great start. Cameron promised his G7 partners when it was in the Northern Ireland, the summit back in 2015, that he would do the same with the Crown dependencies, Jersey, Guernsey and the Isle of Man, and the overseas territories, who are in a way more toxic than us, especially the British Virgin Islands, but Bahamas, Bermuda. They are, I would say, more harmful. So he was under international pressure to tow all of us into line at the time. They rather than be defeated at the time in the British government pulled the Brexit bill, but to avoid having a vote on it, the British government's always been very ambivalent towards its tax havens. Especially, with the Conservatives in power, and they pulled the bill, but the Hodge and Mitchell were going to come back another time to tack it on to another bill. And so Howard Quayle, seen in the middle here, our Chief Minister under the Manx government crest, he, together with Jersey and Guernsey, within 3 months, they had said that they would bring in public access to their company registers within 4 years. Why it took them 4 years, we don't know. And they wanted evidence that it would move towards international norms, and the overseas territories are similarly being encouraged to do it. So that's one thing to illustrate that the secrecy. Why are we so worried about showing who owns a company? What if there's nothing to hide? How is that a problem? Next slide. This is a kind of another example of how I can illustrate what goes on a tax haven. This is a picture of demonstration outside the House of Commons. These are all UK-based self-employed contractors, usually in the IT industry. Don't see many female faces there. And one of the, again, a kind of subgenre of the tax haven here particularly is what we call disguised remuneration. In other words, these self-employed contractors, and the gig economy has seen this group mushroom, they carry out their work in the UK. They've never been to the Isle of Man, but they route their payroll through the Isle of Man. They ask whoever they've given the service to pay them through this Isle of Man payroll company, sometimes called umbrella companies. And they do this simply to get out of paying PAYE and national insurance in the UK. It's a totally artificial scheme. As I say, they've no genuine economic link with the Isle of Man. There are scores, I think 56 at the last count, of outfits over here which do this and nothing but this. Their clients are living in the UK, and they get about 15% cut from doing it. Which of course, so the worker, this contractor, will get 85% of the pay, which is still a lot more than had he or she suffered PAYE and national insurance, of course. This is the these schemes, they vary in their complexity, but typically the amount which is paid back from the Manx payroll company to the worker, the 85% figure, is described in all but the legal paperwork alongside it as a loan. But all the parties concerned, the payer and the recipient, they know full well that this is a loan that will never be repaid. So the story in this Guardian article here is, again, goes back to 2019, when the UK government, to stop this tax leakage, which is significant and growing, they brought in a rule saying that this loan is completely artificial, and that it will be, I think, on the date the law came in, maybe the following year, it would be deemed to be taxable pay. So for some of these guys going back 10, 15 years, they had income which they had enjoyed, and which was suddenly, at a stroke, maybe 10, 15 years of back tax, they suddenly became liable to. And it was allegedly 1 or 2 issues of suicide when this came in, and you can see lives will be lost. Stop the loan charge. They saw what was coming, but it did come in, and they've had to do that. And you think, well, that's fine, that's a victory, that's smoothed out. But I'm speaking to a local friend I know who heads up one of these outfits, and say, are you still in business, Andy? I thought, do you know the UK had clamped down on this now? He said, oh yeah, but we've moved our clients now in Romania and Croatia. So the gig economy is happening all over the world, and so the Isle of Man, and it's not just the Isle of Man, Mauritius is particularly liable to this. So this is one way of purely setting up artificial schemes to get around paying tax where it's been earned. Next slide. Do feel free to ask questions or make comments on the way. I mean, Mark said we'll have time at the end too, but if there's something, particular point I make that you want to ask about, just shout at the time, no problem. So this verse from Micah, isn't Micah great? Shouts out about justice so often. Can I tolerate wicked scales and a bag of dishonest weights? And that's what I think is going on with the loan charge. It's pretending that you haven't earned the money, where you don't pay the tax where you've earned it. Your wealthy are full of violence. Your inhabitants speak lies with tongues of deceit in their mouths. It's about artifice. I think too, it's as well, it was point out that the beneficiaries of these schemes are not always wealthy. They more and more, we've had instances of NHS agency nurses and BBC employees being routed through these companies in the Isle of Man and elsewhere. They often don't know. They're hired, self-employed. The employer likes to get out of national insurance too, if they can, and so there's evidence that some of these people don't know. They sign on day one, maybe with the agency, the employment agency, but they're working ultimately for the BBC or the NHS, and it's I don't know the scale of it, but it could be millions just in the UK alone. But as I say, they are trying to clamp down on it, but the schemes are quite insidious. And you know, how does HMRC always know? Next slide, please. Here we are. This is a more recent story, and one of the but linked to the disguised remuneration schemes. One of the biggest culprits and the biggest firms over here that runs this is called the Knox Group, KNOX, and it's headed up and owned, we think, and because we don't have him as register, by a guy called Doug Barrowman. He's a Scottish, very wealthy entrepreneur, and he has run into trouble in the UK courts. One of his firms, AML, Aston Management Limited, was found that this payroll scheme was found to be illegal. He's been discredited and he's been fined, but it's just a fraction of what he'll be earning. So he's very much implied in here. He moved over here about 5 years ago with his wife, who's pictured here, with his now wife, Lady Michelle Mone, who David Cameron made a baroness in the Lords a few years ago. They were married last year in the Islands Cathedral. And Lady Mone is an entrepreneurs in her own right, in lingerie, and she's in the rag trade, we can say, and she has hit the headlines here because she has she used the VIP lane, which was controversial in itself at the start of the COVID outbreak, to persuade the government to buy over £200 million worth of PPE, of personal protective equipment, masks, gowns, and it seems that she has there's even the story beyond this in the last month or so, evidence that she and Barrowman have benefited to the tune of at least 25 million from this. This doesn't necessarily imply corruption on the same scheme as the payroll, but it shows you what's going on here. They've got a 25 million mansion in the Isle of Man, and featured on the cover of Hello magazine. If you want to look at the pictures of the outside and in, I haven't visited. Next slide, please. Again, yeah, Jesus to the rich young man again. He was trying to be tested. Go sell your possessions, give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. And I suppose when you look at people like Barrowman and Lady Michelle here, the attractiveness of wealth, I think, is seductive and addictive. And we don't know what the rich young man did, but Jesus certainly gave him food for thought. And I think we're all addicts in our own different ways, and wealth can certainly, the accumulation of wealth, Jesus has so much to say about it, and so many warnings he gives to us. We might like to discuss that later. Thank you. Yeah, another little corner of the tax haven here is the way that the island has bent over backwards for wealthy clients. Some of you might remember the Paradise Papers expose in 2017, which plug here featured 15 seconds of me in the front seat of a car driving around the financial quarter of Douglas. And one of the stories of the Paradise Papers, it was based on a leak from Applebee's, mainly in Bermuda, but the journalists who followed it, the money pointed towards the Isle of Man in many cases. And Lewis Hamilton was found to have bought a plane and imported it into the European Union via the Isle of Man, and by doing that, he avoided paying VAT on it. Now, you're only supposed to get a year to exempt from VAT on aircraft if they are for business purposes, but it was shown in Paradise Papers that he was using it for private purposes, and therefore he should have paid VAT. But the Isle of Man government, through its customs and excise here, together with Applebee's, who have got a huge office presence here, along with the big four accountancy firms. They all had a common interest in getting him the VAT back, which, you know, on the plane was, I think it was 16 million, so it was about $1.5 million that he saved in VAT. And again, this is our clientele are the world's wealthy. Why can't they pay VAT on the plane if you can afford that? So again, talking about the ultra rich here and how desperate they are to avoid paying tax. And one theme, of course, is of all of this is that tax isn't a dirty word. None of us really like paying it, but tax, you know, tax gets bad PR, but, you know, tax is what pays for our schools, our hospitals, fixes our roads, pays for police, pays for justice through the courts. It's a good thing. And, you know, just as a side issue, I'd say, you know, how the recent events, the turmoil that you've had in your UK politics these last few weeks and months is that almost the low tax model that Truss was advocating has been overturned now. You know, we have got, okay, we'll have austerity, but there's a recognition that taxes will have to go up, and that same story plays out here in local terms. We're desperately short of tax, and the government's tightening its belt too. But tax isn't a dirty word. We need it. I'll move on. Let's move on, please, Mark. Again, and this is the point that is behind this. Whoever has two coats must share with anyone who has none. Whoever has food must do likewise. It's fundamental to our faith, isn't it? Next, please. Louis Group, again, a story which goes back 4 years now. And this is, in a way, I'm putting this to show another branch of what goes on here. There's been many entrepreneurs have set up investment funds here. They've appealed to the public worldwide to invest money in their funds. This one just went pear-shaped. On the left of the picture here, you see Dr. Alan Louis, very much with his workforce, employed about 50 people here. I think it was, I mentioned this to shamefully, because the workforce was entirely Christian. They started each day with prayer meetings in the office, Dr. Louis is still at large. The fund went pear-shaped. You can see the losses. I know someone who lost £25,000 by investing it. He thought, you know, he was a Christian. He thought it would be blue chip, and it was far from it. Yeah. So again, the offshore is offering 0% to companies. It's offering secrecy, and I think largely it's offering a lax regulatory regime as well. And all those three factors added up to this. There's been many others of dodgy Brazilian teak schemes, etc., that people pay good. And you know, the cliche is always, if it sounds too good to be true, it is. Next, please. Again, and this brings out the artifice, the deceit, the lie, which is at the root of so many schemes here. Those that trample on the needy say, "We will make the ephah small and the shekel great," and practice deceit with false balances, buying the poor for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. And you were talking about your concern for poor countries, and it's sometimes here that I haven't really talked about straightforward tax avoidance, but by wealthy people all over the world putting their money here, not least in for example, the Louis scheme or payroll schemes. They are often, as we've seen, high net worth individuals, and in some instances, these are the elites of developing countries who are squirreling national state assets and putting it into property, either directly in the Isle of Man or through Manx companies without transparency. We had Cristina dos Santos, who's the daughter of the former Angolan dictator, using a Manx company to buy a property in Kensington, Mayfair in London, it avoids, keeps it anonymous, but it also gets it out of paying UK inheritance tax. We don't have that at all over here, and so again, the firm called NGO called Global Witness, who I would commend to you, they do excellent work, have found again that corrupt ministers in Liberia were buying oil blocks or gas blocks off the West African coast through the Manx companies, so again, it's the poor of those countries who are being bought, and they for the pair of sandals. Thank you. So I've probably spoken too long, but I hope I've just given you little vignettes of the sort of things that go on here. And I've just put some ideas, ways forward here. Pray. Sometimes you think, well, you're going nowhere. Speaking out on these issues here is a minority sport, as I said, and the government and finance are very, very much hand in glove together here. And there's the denial about much of what I've said this evening, and so you're thrown back. I can't do this. I've got some friends here, allies. We've got set up a little group called Taxwatch, Isle of Man, and we try to raise the flag the best we can. Taxwatch isn't a Christian group, but there are Christians here. One of the people who work for Catch, CATJ, which is down the bottom line there, Church Action for Tax Justice. She works on the island. She's a real ally too. So we can't do it all ourselves, individually or collectively, and that throws us back on saying, Lord Jesus, help me, help us, show us what's wise, show us what to say, influence the powers that be, create a fairer world. Individual things, but we're pressing for company ownership accounts to be made public. This is the beneficial ownership register particularly, but also on company ownership, but also companies should show their accounts. You can do this in the UK. Why shouldn't we do it here if there's nothing to hide? And the UK is keen on pushing us towards the beneficial ownership register, but only this week that took a blow when the European Court of Justice ruled that the European directive, which was bringing in public access for beneficial ownership registers throughout the EU 27, the ECJ has ruled that directive to be invalid on grounds of privacy and protection of data of the individual. So that's a real spanner in the works there. So just when we thought we were making headway, and the UK, this has happened in the EU, but will obviously doesn't apply to the UK now, and we'll see how they react to it. We'd like to see country by country company accounts, because so much of it is on I haven't really talked about profit shifting as well, but we've got some headquartered global firms here, and they an incident example a few years ago where the Cafe Nero, we don't have any Cafe Nero coffee shops over here, but there's about 200 in the UK. They make about 20 million profit a year, and they've got their parent company is here, and they've set up their administration and the loan schemes so that the parent company bills the UK Cafe Nero 20 million each year. So the Isle of so that eradicates in the UK. There's nothing to pay to the UK taxman because they've got zero profits, and over here where the 20 million of profits has landed, that's all taxed at 0%. So, you know, by country by country accounts would show, again, transparency in that. And Joe Biden's initiative, which has been taken on board by the OECD and the 170 countries in the world now, is coming in to stop particularly the wealthy, very wealthy multinationals, especially the Amazons and the Googles of this world, that public outrage that they pay very little tax anywhere, and so that's a threat to the Isle of Man. But that looks like coming in. Anti-avoidance against Isle of Man personal companies, again, people incorporate themselves here, put all their wealth, dividends, rents, salaries, drawings into their personal company to be taxed at 0%. So again, that hurts the Manx exchequer, but it's a price they pay for having a 0% rate. So again, look at that rate and learn more. I mean, I put Katja's website here, but that's just one of them. I think we finish off with a couple of slides now. I'm nearly through. Thanks for your patience. Again, this thing about possessions, and it's just underlining the point I made before. Take care, says Jesus, be on your guard against all kinds of greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of possessions, does it? And the foolish landowner, I will build larger barns and there store my grain and my goods. But God said to him, you fool, your life will be taken from you tonight. Where do you stand there? And again, another warning, again from Luke, where so many of these warnings are located in the Bible. Was there one more, Mark? I'm not sure. Yeah, again, and this this reminds me of this phrase loss and damage, usually in a climate context, but it's much broader than just climate. Zacchaeus, after he's looked into the eyes of Jesus when Jesus came to his house for tea, he says to Jesus, look, half of my possessions I will give to the poor, and if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house. Amen. Thank you. That really is it.